Now, the greatest radio shows of all time.
Suspense.
The Shadow Node.
Washington calling David Harding, counter-spy.
Classic radio theater.
The Great Gildersleeve. Fibber McGee and Molly.
Dragnet.
Gunsmoke. The Lone Ranger.
Now, step back into a time machine with your host, Wyatt Cox.
Good evening, friends of the Inner Sanctum.
A Memorial Day podcast special here on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. We start off with an episode of the NBC Program Anthology. This episode goes back to Memorial Day 1954, which at the time was always on the 30th day of May, 1954.
Ladies and gentlemen, during the next 30 minutes you will hear Bing Crosby, Frank Lovejoy, Agnes Moorehead, and Walter Houston, as WNBC brings you transcribed a special Memorial Day edition of Anthology. Every Sunday at 3, WNBC, in conjunction with the Poetry Center of the YW and YMHA, 92nd Street and Lexington Avenue in Manhattan, brings you Anthology, a selection of readings of poets past and present, and the music to accompany their poetry. This afternoon, as a tribute to Memorial Day, we're to hear two of America's best-known and best-loved patriotic poems, and an equally well-known American story in verse form, read by Bing Crosby. On this Memorial Day of 1954, we have poetry spanning our nation's history from the earliest times to the present day, from verses in dedication to our earliest settlers, to a story in verse which can very well serve as a symbol of that precious freedom for which so many American men and women have fought and died down through the long centuries. We begin with a poem of the birth of our country. Here is the distinguished American actress, Miss Agnes Moorehead, in a dramatic reading of The Landing of the Pilgrim Fathers.
The breaking waves dashed high on a stern and rock-bound coast, and the woods against a stormy sky their giant branches tossed. And the heavy night hung dark the hills and waters o'er, when a band of exiles moored their bark on a wild New England shore. Not as the conqueror comes, they, the true-hearted, came. Not with the roll of stirring drums and the trumpets that sing of fame. Not as the flying come, in silence and in fear. They shook the depths of the desert's gloom with their hymns of lofty cheer. Amidst the storm they sang, and the stars heard, and the sea, and the sounding aisles of the dim woods rang to the anthem of the free. The ocean eagle soared from his nest by the white waves foam, and the rocking pines of the forest roared. This was their welcome home. There were men with hoary hair amidst that pilgrim band. Why had they come to wither there, away from their childhood's land? There was woman's fearless eye, lit by her deep love's truth. There was manhood's brow serenely high, and the fiery heart of youth. what sought they thus afar? Bright jewels of the mine, the wealth of sea, the spoils of war. They sought a faith's pure shrine. I call it holy ground, the soil where first they trod. They left unstained what there they found, freedom to worship God.
In the 1700s, we fought and won our liberty. And then, within another century, America was to go to war not once but twice again. And to our great shame, won a war between the states in which citizen fought citizen. In the North, in the South, divided loyalties, divided homes, names like Harper's Ferry, Shiloh, Bull Run, and in the White House, a tall, gaunt, unhappy man named Abraham Lincoln. The late Walter Houston brings us a poem of the Civil War, a poem of intense sadness written by Walt Whitman upon the assassination of President Lincoln. The special musical accompaniment was written by Victor Young. Walter Houston reads, "O Captain, my Captain."
Oh, Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every wreck, the prize we sought is won. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting, while follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But oh, heart, 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 oh, the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen, cold, and dead. Oh, Captain, my Captain, rise up and hear the bells. Rise up, for you the flag is flung, for you the bugle trills, for you bouquets and ribboned wreaths, for you the shores are crowding, for you they call, the swaying mass, their eager faces turning. Here, Captain, dear father, the arm beneath your head. Is it some dream that on the deck you've fallen cold and dead? My captain does not answer. His lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm. He has no pulse nor will. The ship is anchored safe and sound, its voyage closed and done. From fearful trip the victor ship comes in with object won. Exult, O shores, and ring, O bells. But I with mournful tread walk the deck my captain lies, fallen, cold, and dead.
May 30th, 1954 Anthology on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. The show aired on WNBC, but you can tell there are a lot of NBC elements in this program. Anthology, Memorial Day, May 30th, 1954.
major portion of this special Memorial Day program, we're to listen to The Man Without a Country, a poetic narrative by Jean Holloway, based on Edward Everett Hale's immortal story, and narrated by Bing Crosby, with Frank Lovejoy as Philip Nolan. Many of us have heard this story before. It's been read to us by grammar school teachers or declaimed, perhaps, by stammering fellow students in classrooms distracted by spring whispering at an open window or by an autumn kaleidoscope of whirling leaves. We heard it as a text or a lesson. We learned it long before we could conceive of what it would be like to be banished forever from the land of our birth. Told in dramatic form, the story of Philip Nolan takes on a new stature, a greater depth, a stronger meaning. We feel that upon an American holiday such as this, it is highly appropriate to retell this fine American story, and especially in Jean Holloway's exciting radio verse. And now, The Man Without a Country.
Order in the court! Order in the court! The attorney for the state will kindly continue.
Mr. Nolan, is it not true that you are part of a conspiracy to destroy the government of the United States?
No, that is not true. That is not true, I tell you.
Do you dare to deny your friendship with Aaron Burr?
No, I don't deny that. But I do deny all your accusations of treason.
Lieutenant Nolan, Aaron Burr has shown himself to be an enemy of the United States government. As an American officer, your country's enemies are your enemies. By your association with Aaron Burr, you betrayed the uniform you wear, the flag you follow, the country you profess to serve. That is true, is it not, Mr. Nolan?
No, it is not true. It is not true.
You still dare to defend your association with Aaron Burr?
I don't think it needs defending. I only talk to the man.
You don't think it needs defending? You need say no more, Lieutenant Nolan. I rest my case, Your Honor.
Philip Nolan, rise and face the court. Philip Nolan, is there anything you wish to say to show that you have always been faithful to the United States?
The United States? Damn the United States! I wish I may never hear of the United States again!
Who was that man? Who would dare utter such treason? Let me tell you a story, America, about you and your growing. Not a story of a national hero, but of Philip Nolan, who severed a bond before he knew its value. Listen to the story of the man without a country. Think back, way back to the 1800s. Remember? You were still an adolescent then. You were proud of being a nation of 17 states. And you were beginning to speak grandly of adding Michigan, Indiana, and Mississippi, and becoming 20. Zealous old Tom Jefferson was in the White House, and down in the South was a man named Aaron Burr, and a man named Philip Nolan. They say now that history has sifted the facts and weighed the evidence, they say Philip Nolan was as fine an officer as any in the Western Division. Oh, he was a little more hot-headed than some, a little swifter to anger than others, a little too quick sometimes about getting his 2 cents of opinion in, but he was not alone in this. There were many dashing young gallants like him, as ready to die for a kiss as a flag. And Philip Nolan might have gone to his final sleep among the vine-covered homes of the dead in Orleans as quietly as any of them, had a star not crossed his path one night.
Mr. Nolan, I'm Aaron Burr. I'm told you're a young man of remarkable promise. I should like to talk to you about your future.
Why, thank you, sir. I hardly know what to say. Thank you very much.
A star comes that way sometimes. Sudden, blinding, dazzling. Aaron Burr came as a disguised conqueror. Rumor had it that there was an army behind him and an empire before. But that first day in Orleans, though Philip Nolan wasn't to know it for a long time yet, he became the man without a country. It was only a step from Aaron Burr's side to a trial for treason.
United States versus Philip Nolan.
He was bewildered, deeply hurt, embittered. Above all else, he was young. An older man would have checked his anger. A traitor would have been wise enough to hide his feelings, but Philip Nolan was neither a wise man nor a traitor. A moment's silence, and then those words that were to echo forever through his life.
I wish I may never hear of the United States again.
I wish I may never hear of the United States again.
I wish I may never hear of
The words filled the courtroom, shivered against the walls. No one spoke, no word fell to combat those other words. Half the officers in the room had served through the Revolution. They had fought their way, starved and frozen through endless bitter months, so that one day a people could say, "This is my country." Judge and jury rose and left the court wordlessly. No one else stirred. Someone in the back of the room sighed, and someone else coughed. That was all. 15 minutes went by like 15 years before the judge returned.
Prisoner, hear the sentence of the court. The court decides, subject to the approval of the President, that you shall have your wish. You will never hear the name of the United States again.
It was the fall of 1807. It would be 1863 before he heard her name again. The leaves would grow red in Maryland soon. They'd be piled along the Potomac for burning. Their smoke would spiral into lace against the November skies. They'd be tapping the trees for maple sugar in the Vermont woods, and the New England housewives would gather in their spiced kitchens to prepare the Thanksgiving puddings. The Cape Cod fishermen would go out in the misty dawn for their nets, and the harvest would be a bright promise on the Indiana hillsides. The Blue Ridge and the Allegheny and the Rockies would pull the snow up over their shoulders and settle down for the winter. And the Mississippi would go slipping on through the heart of America. There would be hearth fires and Christmas trees, and there'd be dances. There would be church service and wedding ceremonial and baptismal. But not for Philip Nolan. His was the sea and the bitterness of salt on his lips and no port at evenings. And in one sudden, heart-stabbing moment, Philip Nolan knew what he had lost.
Sir, you will receive from Lieutenant Neal the person of Philip Nolan, late a lieutenant in the United States Army. You will take the prisoner on board your ship and keep him there with such precautions as shall prevent his escape. You will provide him with such quarters, rations, and clothing as would be proper for an officer of his late rank. But under no circumstances is he to ever to hear of his country or see any information regarding it.
So Philip Nolan walked the decks of the seven seas, and he thought about America. But he never asked about her. He talked to his shipmates about the weather, about the sea, about all things but home. In foreign ports where he was rarely permitted to go ashore, he filled his days with reading. But in the books and in the papers given him, there was no mention of America. For him, she was only a dream that had ceased existing. He was a ghost among his companions, drifting from port to port, listening to a word that filled his heart, that reached him in the wind, that sighed from the rigging. But the waves whispered through the midnight. One word, America.
The grass is blue in Kentucky this spring. Wouldn't you like to ride through it with the earth hard and firm under your horse's feet? Think of it, earth under you.
The flower girls are in the streets of Orleans now. It's almost time for the Mardi Gras. Remember the girl you kissed at the Mardi Gras?
The fields are white with cotton now. The slaves are singing. What would you give to hear their voices?
The snow is thick and white in New England. They are riding through it to the Christmas parties. Can't you hear the sleigh bells? How long is it since you heard sleigh?
Leave me alone. I can't stand thinking anymore. Oh, God, let me stop remembering.
I wish I may never hear of the United States again. I wish I may never hear of the United States again.
The court decides, subject to the approval of the President, that you shall have your wish.
No! No! No!
The men were kind enough. On Sunday afternoons when they sat on deck, smoking and chatting, they invited Nolan to join them. He had a pleasant voice. Sometimes they asked him to read to them. One day the reading sessions came to an abrupt end.
Here, Nolan, let's have something out of this.
The Lay of the Last Minstrel. Walter Scott, eh?
Yeah, it's a new book the captain sent down. He says there's some nice stuff in it.
Well, let's have a look at it. Breathes there the man with soul so dead, who never to himself has said, this is my own, my native land. Whose heart hath ne'er within him burned, as home his footsteps he hath turned from wandering on a foreign strand. If such there breathe, someone else finish it. I'm something to attend to below.
Philip Nolan could never find peace. Ships docked, set sail, then went home on leave. He watched in wordless agony. He thought of candlelight on warm, gracious tables, of gardens where a man could crumble the rich soil in his fingers, of linens whipping on the clotheslines and the friendly smells of kitchens. He thought of moonlight on hair that was soft as silk to the touch, of eyes liquid in the starlight, of lips velvet smooth and ripe for kissing. He thought of arms opened wide to gather in the returning sailor, and one special voice that would say, welcome home. He thought of perfume and music and the rustle of silk. He was young. There was a fierce hunger in him. Then one night in the Mediterranean, some ladies were invited aboard for a ship's ball. All that was young in Philip Nolan died that night, as he stood on deck, looking at the girl he had loved a lifetime ago.
Anne Emery.
Why, Philip Nolan. This is a surprise. You're looking splendid, Philip. The sea evidently agrees with you.
I'd forgotten how lovely you are.
You must have forgotten many things.
It's almost impossible to believe, finding you way out here.
I'm on my way home. I've been visiting in France.
I tried to see you before I left. They wouldn't let me see anyone.
I understand. I was very busy at the time anyhow. I was married soon after you left.
Married?
Yes, of course. Hadn't you heard? I have a little boy now.
A little boy? You must be very happy.
I am, Philip.
It's so strange that we should meet again way out here.
I'm a little sorry we did meet. I'd forgotten you. It was better that way.
I loved you very much. I loved you and I lost you. And everything else I loved in one mad moment. Oh, my dear.
I think we should get back to the dances.
Yeah, of course. Anne, would you tell me just one thing? What do you hear from home?
Home, Mr. Nolan? I thought you were the man who never wanted to hear of home again.
I beg your pardon. Good night, Anne.
Philip Nolan knew in that moment how alone he was. One man with only the sea for the rest of his life, and one nameless port at the end of it. The days became weeks, and the weeks years that marched across his forehead and left him old. His eyes were deep pools of loneliness, his heart completely empty. No one knew until the day he was dying how deep his hurt had gone. No one knew until that day when they entered his room for the first time and found it a shrine to America. Stars and stripes were draped around a picture of Washington, and he had painted a majestic eagle with its foot clasping the whole globe. At the foot of his bed was a great map of the United States, drawn from memory.
Here, Captain. You see, I have a country.
Yes, I see, Nolan. How do you feel? Is there anything I can do for you?
Captain, I'm dying. I'll never see my country again. But there's not a man on this ship or in all the United States that loves you as I do. Would you tell me about America?
Tell you about America? How can I begin to tell you about America?
He had left America in 1807. It was 1863. War had come and gone in 1812, and Francis Scott Key had sat on a British battleship and written the national anthem. Jackson had taken the Florida Territory. A new flag had been raised in Washington with 13 alternate stripes and 20 stars. 9 presidents had been in the White House. The Monroe Doctrine had been born, the cornerstone of American foreign policy.
The continents of the Western Hemisphere are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any of the European powers.
The United States had begun to gather themselves into a nation.
It is not the states, but the people of the nation who have made the Union. It is, sir, the people's constitution, the people's government, made for the people, answerable to the people.
Tell him about America. Tell him about Peter Cooper's steam locomotive, the Tom Thumb, drawing its first train of cars over 23 miles of the B&O Railroad. Tell him about America. Andrew Jackson had moved the Indians west of the Mississippi. Arkansas, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa had joined the nation. The Battle of the Alamo had been fought in Texas and gold discovered in California. A new nation had spanned 2 oceans, and in the White House was the president whose words were the voice of the new nation.
Of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Tell him about America, the power, the color, the strength, the beauty, the tears, the triumphs. Tell him so that he knows the glory he thrust aside.
She's a great nation, Captain. A great nation.
Yes, Nolan, a great nation. Nolan. Nolan.
And so his last thought was of his country. Before they lowered him into the sea, they draped the flag of the United States over his coffin. How proud that would have made him. The captain intoned the last rites. The bugler played taps. And the ceremony was over.
Men, we found this paper in Nolan's things. Bury me in the sea. It has been my home, and I love it. But will someone not set up a stone for my memory at Fort Adams or at Orleans, so that my disgrace will not follow me through eternity? Say on it, in memory of Philip Nolan, lieutenant in the Army of the United States. He loved his country as no other man has ever loved her, but no man deserved less at her hands. We will do as he wished.
And so, although the sea claimed him, his soul would know the feeling of land again. The flowers would be near him, and the trees and the earth of America. He would know the seasons and the pulsing life of the nation. There would be a flag over him and the knowledge of belonging. And thus, the man without a country came home to America.
The Man Without a Country, a poetic narrative by Jean Holloway, based on Edward Everett Hale's immortal story, and narrated by Bing Crosby with Frank Lovejoy as Philip Nolan, on Anthology, Memorial Day, 1954. And so, Anthology number 13, transcribed and dated Sunday, May 30th. Next week, our guest will be Marion Rooney of Cademan Records, who will tell us the story behind their famous recordings of contemporary American poets and readers such as Hurd Hatfield, Joe Van Fleet, and Frank Silvera. With her, Miss Rooney will bring the newest Cademan recording of Judith Anderson, reading the poetry of Edna St. Vincent Millay. Anthology comes to you with the cooperation of the YW and YMHA Poetry Center, 92nd Street and Lexington Avenue, John Milcom Brennan, Director. The program is produced by Steve White, written and directed by Draper Lewis. And now this is Fleetwood wishing you good luck and good reading. Don't forget to join us next Sunday at 3 for another edition of Anthology on your community stations in New York.
Sunday, May 30th, 1954, Anthology on Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. Many of you enjoy hearing a soap opera, and so we're going to hear an episode of Against the Storm. This was broadcast just prior to World War II, May 30th, 1941.
Against the Storm.
Like your brother Joe. How old would he be now if he hadn't been killed in the Civil War? Well, let me see. Today is May 30th, 1894.
Jason McKinley Allen remembers a day from his own and Porky Mason's country childhood. Today in Against the Storm. We bring you another chapter of Against the Storm, written by Sandra Michael and presented by the makers of Ivory. Now, today is the last time this week I can remind you about the marvelous special offer new Double Quick Ivory Flakes is making. So please jot down on your calendar that today's the day to send in your order. Now listen, we're offering you a wonderful opportunity to get a pair of beautiful Boulevard brand pure silk crepe stockings at a truly tremendous saving. Yes, and we've selected these fine 3-thread crepe stockings with an eye to all the new fashion points, an eye to long-wearing qualities and beauty, too. They're full-fashioned, all silk from top to toe, and made by a famous hosiery maker. They're knit inside out, so you get that wonderful smooth dull finish on the outside. And that dull finish makes these stockings very flattering to wear. And the color, it's called Tiara, a lovely suntan shade that goes with every color in the rainbow. And now about long wear. Well, listen, these stockings have a heel and foot that are designed in a different way. No side seams where a mean little run so often start. And say, if you'll remember to take care of these stockings with new Double Quick Ivory Flakes every night, well, it'll help you get wonderfully long wear. Lady, are you going to be thrilled when you see these stockings? Why, women just rave about them. We showed them to hundreds of women, and most of them said they thought these stockings were worth at least half again as much as we're asking. In fact, dozens of them said they thought they should cost $1 or more. Oh, but look, here's how easily and thriftily you can get 1, 2, or 3 pairs of these Boulevard brand stockings for yourself. For each pair you want, simply send 50 cents and 1 Ivory Flakes box top, either size. Address Ivory Flakes, Cincinnati, Ohio. Stockings come in sizes 8.5 to 11, and be sure to include your stocking size. Remember, simply send 50 cents with your name and address and 1 Ivory Flakes box top to Ivory Flakes, Cincinnati, Ohio. Allow about 2 weeks for delivery. And hurry, friends, because this offer is limited. Good in the United States only. Professor Allen is standing on the porch this morning, thinking, or at least feeling, that this is Sunday. But today, instead of churchgoers, he sees a group of children, 6 or 7 of them, walk briskly past around the corner and off beneath the sunny trees. Some of them carried flowers. All of them carried small, rather inflexible flags. The sight awoke some vague suggestion of a very old memory in the professor's mind. He was trying to get hold of whatever it was when he heard the screen door open.
Margaret? Ah, good, it is you.
Oh, well, now. Who did you think it might have been? Nobody else at home this morning.
Really? The girls and Penny all go to church?
No, they've gone to the song festival at the Soldiers' Home.
Song festival? Oh, my word, I was thinking this was Sunday.
Seems like it. But it's Memorial Day.
Memorial Day, of course. That's what those children reminded me of.
What children?
Oh, a group of youngsters went by here a minute ago. Flowers and flags.
I suppose they were going out to the cemetery.
No doubt. I knew they reminded me of something of my own childhood. One very particular day when Porky Mason and I brought flowers and flags out to the Civil War graves in the country cemetery at home. Goodness, Margaret, I can see that old place so clearly. A gentle slope of ground to the south of the church with big old trees here and there. The gravestones leaning a little this way and that, as if to make themselves more comfortable. It was really a very pleasant place, friendly and peaceful. Porky and I enjoyed sitting there talking that day. It was one of those warm, cool days, you know.
Very much like today, I imagine. And there were irises in the bouquets and bleeding hearts, and perhaps a few early peonies.
There were. And we had quite a time there at the church, running back and forth to the pump and down to the veterans' graves, filling vases and matching them up to be sure the bouquets were all fair and equal. When we were all finished, we sat down to rest in the shade.
Kind of warm, ain't it? You're kind of fat. I guess that's why you get warm when you work, Porky. Yeah, I guess. I don't care, though. Think we got 'em all about fair and even, Porky? I guess. I put an extra peony on that one over there, though, Jason. Seems kind of lonesome out there in the corner by himself. Looks that way. But I don't think you're lonesome when you're dead. Oh, gee, I would be. Nobody to go fishing with and nobody to talk to. Well, if you're in heaven... Yeah. Uh-huh. Well, I'd rather be alive, though. Me too. George Jeremiah Hewitt, born August 1st, 1845. Died September 27th, 1863. September 21st, 1863. Is that what it says? Oh, yeah, 21st. Aged 18 years, 1 month, 20 days. What's it say underneath the dove? Flowers are in the way from here. Says, died that others might live. He was a soldier. Well, sure, ain't that why we decorated his grave? Gosh, he was just about as old as your brother Joe, Porky. 18. That's not very old. How old would he be now if he hadn't been killed in the Civil War? Well, 1863 to 1894. How long is that, Jason? Oh, 63 to 93 is 30, and 1 is 31. Gosh, dead for 31 years. It's a long time. Kind of funny, isn't it? He got killed and some didn't get killed. Like your one grandfather and my uncle's. Grandpa's 2 brothers got killed. I know it. I'm glad Grandpa wasn't killed. I'm glad there aren't going to be any wars anymore. Pa says there always will be. Of course there won't. Don't do any good to kill people, Porky. And it's a sin, too. Can you imagine shooting anybody? Of course not. Why should I shoot anybody? You have to in a war. Grandpa shot a man at the Battle of Atlanta. He wakes up sometimes at night, crying. Your Grandpa Mason? That swears? Sure. He cries because he has a dream about the man he shot. The man wasn't dead right away, and Grandpa gave him a drink of water from a stream, and the man smiled and said thanks. When Grandpa remembers that, he cries. You know what my father says? What? He says, instead of people going out in armies and killing each other to see who wins, they ought to get up teams and play baseball to see who wins. Your father's a good joker. I like him. But he wasn't joking. He means it. He says it doesn't prove you're better than somebody else if you can beat them playing baseball. But it doesn't prove anything if you can beat them killing people either. And playing baseball, at least nobody gets killed.
Well, if you get to be a senator or the president of the United States, you can put up a law like that, Jason.
I'm not going to be president. Maybe you are, though.
Not me. I'm going to run a livery stable and get myself a team of the fastest greys you ever saw in your life. Oh, golly, how sleepy aren't you, Jason?
I think we both fell asleep, sitting there beside the grave of George Jeremiah Hewitt.
Aged 18 years. Died that others might live. Oh, Jason. And your beloved friend, Porky?
Poor old Porky. He got his livery stable all right and turned it into a garage eventually. And in 1917, he died in France. That democracy might live.
Did he have any children?
Porky? Yes, boy. I suppose he must be 26, 27 years old.
What would you say now if Porky could tell you over again, there'll always be war?
I'd say what I said then, with more conviction, Margaret. It's just as absurd to say that wars have to be as it would have been to say we'll always burn witches at the stake. Heaven knows we still do our share of a different kind of witch burning, but we do less of that than we used to, too. It may be that man's fellow feeling has been slower to develop than his mechanical and scientific skill, but we're learning.
I hope we are, Jason.
Be sure of it. A new world, a younger world should come.
A younger world. That's what we need, isn't it? The honest vision of childhood. The same kind of unspoiled vision you and Porky had, looking at the follies of the world from a country graveyard. Sitting among the young dead, who never should have died as they did. Oh, Jason. And then, perhaps someday that inscription really will come true, in a sad, paradoxical, roundabout way. They died that others might live.
Friends, send in this very day for new Double Quick Ivory Flake special bargain offer. We offer you one pair or several pairs of beautiful Boulevard brand crepe silk stockings at a marvelous saving. These stockings are pure silk from top to toe. They're knit inside out to give you that smooth, dull finish that's so flattering. So send for yours and then take care of them with new Double Quick Ivory Flakes. And see how this nightly washing care helps you get wonderful stocking wear. Now remember, these stockings are available in sizes from 8.5 to 11, and they're made by a famous hosiery maker. You'll be crazy about them once you see them. So get your order in the mail today. Now, here's all you do. For each pair of stockings you want, send 50 cents and one Ivory Flakes box top, either size. Address Ivory Flakes, Cincinnati, Ohio. 50 cents with your name and address and one Ivory Flakes box top to Ivory Flakes, Cincinnati, Ohio. Be sure to include your stocking size. This offer is good in the United States only. Monday, Peter Alden, the young subject of all of Christie's and Philip's discussions, appears to his real father, but in an unusual dream. Monday, in Against the Storm. This This is Richard Stark, wishing you a pleasant weekend for Procter & Gamble, the makers of Ivory. 99 and 44 100% pure.
Under the sponsorship of Ivory Soap, which is why they were called soap operas. They were aimed primarily at the housewife. The little quarter-hour snippets of continuing serials. Against the Storm, May 30th, 1941. You're listening to Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox, a podcast special. Let's close out, because, one of the things that we talk about classic radio theater is it's not just about the old-time radio shows. It's about history. This is a broadcast from Raymond Gram Swing, a well-known journalist, print reporter, broadcast commentator, and this is broadcast Memorial Day 1945, right at the tail end of World War II.
Washington, May 30th, the 904th day of the war. Raymond Gram Swing reviews history on the march. A friendly service from your mobile gas dealer at the sign of the Flying Red Horse.
I dislike to think of any of you being cast on a desert island, but let's just suppose you were. Now, if you were able to rescue a limited number of pounds of food, naturally, you'd choose the most nourishing kind. Food that would stretch out over the greatest number of days until relief arrived. Now, that's the principle guiding millions of motorists nowadays in the selection of gasoline. They want the kind that will stretch out over the greatest number of days. That is, give them the most mileage possible. Here's a fact to mull over. Today, when mileage counts for so much, Mobil gas is America's favorite gasoline. I can tell you a lot of other fine things about Mobil gas, but this fact is so significant that if anyone wants mileage, he should drive in at the sign of the Flying Red Horse. And now, from the nation's capital, Raymond Gram Swing.
Good evening. This is Memorial Day. At the first American military cemetery established in Britain, in which many American flyers have been buried since it was opened last December, an order of the day from General Eisenhower was read. It serves well as an appropriate text for this day. We of the United Nations, it said, must live and work together without regard to race or nationality, creed or service, uniform or rank. Supported by our homelands, we must fight side by side, relentlessly at sea, on land, and in the air, so that we shall win together a better world, secure and free for all men everywhere. Appropriate to the day, too, was the news that leaders of the great powers are to meet in Washington to discuss the security of the better world to which General Eisenhower referred. Secretary Hull's announcement last night that Britain, the Soviet Union, and China are to be approached, and later members of the United Nations, as to plans for a security system, was followed by prompt action today. The British, Russian, and Chinese ambassadors were called in, and it was announced that special envoys from London and Moscow are to come to Washington for what are called informal talks. It is to be assumed that an envoy from China also will be invited. This informal talk in Washington might be called the Spadework Conference, at which the details of a security system are to be worked out. It will not be informal in the sense that hard and telling work will not be done. It will prepare the draft of an agreement for which a formal conference will be called, and that one will polish up the final text and end in the flourish of signatures under Klieg lights. It was learned that plans for this next Washington conference were laid at Moscow when the four-power declaration about a post-war organization was drafted. But it was not disclosed today who will be coming to Washington.
it is certain that the conference will not be on the foreign secretary level, as was the Moscow conference. However, the spade work is not to be left to the ambassadors already in Washington. Special envoys are to come. And since they will be less than foreign secretaries and more than ambassadors, the range of choice is narrow. For Britain, it may be Alexander Cadogan, the permanent undersecretary for foreign affairs. And for the Soviet Union, Vice Commissar for Foreign Affairs Wyszynski. An American draft for a post-war organization will be laid before them. They will make counter-proposals. And when enough progress in harmonizing these drafts has been made, the spades will be laid aside and fountain pens can be substituted. Then, presumably, the foreign secretaries will meet as they did at Moscow. The informal meeting is expected to begin by midsummer. Below Rome, the Germans grimly defended their temporary anchor at Valmontone, and thus gave their lines to the east and south time to pull back. But the late dispatches, both from Allied headquarters and from London, ring with the tone of coming triumph. General Clark, at a Memorial Day ceremony, declared that before many days have passed, Rome will be liberated. From Allied headquarters in Naples tonight comes the word of mounting signs that the Germans intend to abandon Rome in an attempt to withdraw intact for a new stand in North Italy. The Nazi divisions southeast of Valmontone are striking off through the hills from the Via Casalina along secondary roads that would carry them well to the east of Rome. American tanks are pressing upon Albano, only 13 miles from Rome, and village after village was taken today. Important gains were made on the Velletri-Valmontone road after the repulse of a heavy attack of the Hermann Goering division, in which enemy casualties were heavy. London experts said that Kesselring already had lost a quarter of his 200,000 men in Italy, and it was predicted, perhaps over-optimistically, that 30 to 40,000 German prisoners will be taken in the current phase of the campaign. So it is doubted that the 10th and 14th German armies can make a stand south of the Po. On the Romanian front, the lull since April 11th was broken by a heavy German attack near Iasi, which the Russians admitted made some gains, described as insignificant. The Germans, striking first, obviously are trying to throw off balance an expected Russian offensive, and this German attack can be read as the prelude to the renewal of the great Russian campaign. The air war today, it is stated, brought 6,000 bombers and fighters over Axis Europe, attacking 8 aircraft plants and 7 aerodromes in Germany and Austria, as well as rail centers and coastal fortifications in France, Belgium, and Yugoslavia. Perhaps the most unsatisfactory reporting of the war is about this war in the air, and perhaps it can't be done to anyone's satisfaction. News accounts of the sorties by the thousands have worn out their power to awaken the imagination. The temptation is to try to prod the imagination by adding more planes to the total, but the numbers have ceased to convey much meaning. When the information about air operations is given out in London, the exact figure of the planes participating is not known. What is known is the number of planes which would take part from chosen formations if all planes of those formations were able to take part. That's the maximum figure. And then there's the true figure, which may be as much as 25% less. The maximum figure, however, gets into most of the news agency accounts as the real one, and sometimes even that is exaggerated. So we sometimes have an untrue picture of the number of planes participating. That of itself isn't as deceptive as one might think. The effectiveness of bombing at this stage of the war is so much greater than it was a year ago that the higher figure of planes doesn't suggest a wrong idea of the damage done, which is what matters. but it is next to impossible to translate that damage into terms which can be communicated. I was speaking with an air officer about this and found that he was trying to find better terms. He'd been reading over the record which showed that 30,000 tons of bombs had been dropped on Europe in 2 weeks. That's like dropping 1,500 statues of liberty, he said. Well, that may make it somewhat more vivid, but even that doesn't tell the story, which is not the weight of bombs dropped, but the damage they do. And here official secrecy places a screen over the operations because technical improvements now have made bombing far more accurate, particularly the Pathfinder technique for night bombing. And the blockbusters grow heavier each month, it seems, and spread their ruin over a widening area. But until the Air Forces feel like telling about their new techniques and devices, the story of the damage done can't be intelligible. There's another side of the story, of course. Defense has improved along with attack. The fact that Berlin manages to carry on a routine kind of life testifies to that, for Berlin has frequently had 5 times as many bombs in a few minutes as London ever received in a whole night. And then dispersal of industry must have been reduced to something like a science in Germany by now. The British introduced it early in the Blitz, with the result that production in Coventry was cut down not more than 15% by the great attack on that city, and then only for 2 weeks. The answer to dispersal is pinpoint bombing of the smaller plants, and this is being done in Germany, but the results are not announced. The most eloquent evidence of the effectiveness of bombing is the propaganda now being conducted and on a large scale by the Nazis. Last week, the Nazi radio served notice that protection for downed Allied airmen from the infuriated German public could no longer be guaranteed. Now the Germans have launched accounts of the lynching of 5 American flyers who bailed out over Germany. And the Nazi radio is stirring up hatred for American and British aviators, which is an incitement to the violence which the Nazis say they're not going to control. No official information about the 5 reported lynchings has been received, and the source of the story, a German agency in Sweden, is highly unreliable. That's not the case of the story last week of the shooting of 47 United Nations airmen while trying to escape from a German prison camp. There now is official confirmation that they were shot. London has their names, and Secretary Eden has filed a strong protest, but there still is no reliable statement of the circumstances of that shooting. The German propaganda as to the treatment to be expected by Allied aviators so far is no more than propaganda. It is devised to scare airmen, which it won't do, and their families, which it may. It may not remain propaganda, however, and the Germans may be ready to adopt the practices of the Japanese and go them one worse by officially inspiring lynching. However, there's another possibility. The Germans may be covering up the awkward fact that the Allied bombings have whipped civilian resentment into such a frenzy that the German authorities have lost control over their own population. But the more likely explanation is that the German authorities are trying to hurt the morale of the Allied flyers. And they are so excited that they forget that they themselves ever bombed Britain or any other foreign country. Otto Krieg, German commentator, said over the Berlin radio, "The world has had to take notice of the fact that the German people have now reached that stage of hate in which justice is no longer determined by the letter of the law, but solely by facts. The limitless, murderous lust of American and British air gangsters," he continued, "makes it impossible for the sound instincts of people to continue treating a criminal like an honorable soldier. About this point, there is no longer any doubt among the German people." During the Blitz over England, the rage of British civilians against German aviators was high, but the British officials never tried to incite it or exploit it. That German civilians should hate the Allied flyers is inevitable, but the propaganda campaign is a kind of official exultation at the prospect of dragging the official conduct of the war to a lower level. This is how the Nazi mind works, and one can be sure that the cornered Nazi leaders will not submit to defeat without resorting to every conceivable means of destruction, regardless of law, ethics, or decency. And now a friendly message to wartime America.
Thank you, Mr. Swing. If you had a valuable diamond, you'd pay a few cents to protect it against loss, wouldn't you? Yet you have valuable possessions that you may lose if you're not careful. That winter suit you look so smart in, that overcoat your husband wears with pride, those fluffy woolen blankets, they're moth bait. This summer, moths can ruin 'em and enjoy every mouthful. So protect 'em against moths. Pack 'em away in bugaboo moth crystals that destroy moth worms before they become destructive. And to rid your home of moths, flies, ants, mosquitoes, and other household pests, use bugaboo insect spray. This fragrant insecticide kills them right now. When sprayed, it will not stain fabrics. And use bugaboo garden spray for garden pests. Ask for it at your department or hardware store or your mobile gas dealer. Listen tomorrow night to Raymond Gram Swing at this hour over this station. Gasoline powers the attack. Don't waste a drop. This is the Blue Network.
And to most of our friends, you know, the Blue Network is what is now ABC. It started up as NBC's Blue Network. They had Blue and Red and probably another West Coast network that I don't recall. But I can tell you that there you heard what war was like and how people got the news of the war in reality. All righty, that from May 30th, 1945. Thank you for tuning in to this podcast special, Classic Radio Theater with Wyatt Cox. Have yourself a great day and a great Memorial Day.